Hey everybody, and welcome to the Glittersquid Outlander recap. We are on episode 202, not in Scotland anymore, and this is our second episode so far of this season. Makes sense, it's the second episode. I'm Natanya, one of your hosts, and we have with us...
Hi, I'm Marzia.
Hi, I'm Jackie.
So we do not have Andrea with us tonight. She is detained, but we have a great little group here, and we have all kinds of excellent things to talk about. I have some things I'd like to talk about and some questions, but I think the thing that is pressing on all of our minds, we might need to start with the honeypot. I don't know. I kind of feel like there may be no other place for us to start because we're going to just anticipating it the whole time. So,
like, as someone with a 4-year-old obsessed with Winnie the Pooh, that was just, it was like a bit of a transition from how I usually think of honeypots. I'll never look at Winnie the Pooh the same way again.
It was also a difference between the book and the TV show.
Yeah.
Really? I haven't gotten that far in the book yet.
So to spoil the book, in the book, actually what happens is that she just gets her legs done.
Mm-hmm.
And he thinks that's horrible. Why would you do that? And then she mentioned, oh, but my friend got everything done.
Right.
And she goes, and he says, like a wee lass.
Yeah.
Right, which I feel like there's two directions that you can go when your significant other shaves their nether regions. You can either say, oh, it's really sexy that you've done something like that for me, which is how the TV show played it, or you can go, oh my God, that resembles a child.
Right.
Right.
And I'm thinking contextually, I don't know that he would have the wow, that's so sexy that you tried something different for me.
Yeah, I definitely felt like that was an attempt to modernize it for the audience.
Yeah.
And to make the French seem even more debauched. I mean, maybe this is just a sensitivity on my part, being half French Canadian, but I do feel like we're so often portrayed as completely lascivious, absolutely without moral ground, and doing things, and they're really trying to position them as the anti-Scots. And
Right.
I would argue that, well, certainly in the higher echelons, there were certain trends and all kinds of bizarre things. We can talk about the potty scene, too, because I just read that in the book as well, which it's mentioned, but it's nowhere near as graphic as it is. And I think I'll bring that up a little bit later, something else I'm thinking about. But it puts it to mind to me, when you're translating something that's as dense of a book as this Outlander series is, and you don't have the sort of space that you normally do. I mean, granted, thankfully they're doing this in a series. It's not like a 2-hour movie. We're not trying to cram everything in because that would be horrible. It's not cramming some things in, but anyway, that's another thing. But I think it's just a deliberate attempt to try to both, and I think it also brings in maybe Claire's modernism a little bit. I don't really know the history of the Brazilian well enough to know like at what point it's starting. But I always thought Europeans get the up nose from Americans for being hairy, right? That's like people are like, oh, I went to France and all the women didn't shave their armpits and it was disgusting. And now we're getting a completely different view.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure how accurate any of it is. I didn't really want to Google that, so
that was my question. I almost did Google it, but I didn't. I kind of just didn't want to go there
honeypot, bare honeypot.
Right,
really like sad pictures of Winnie the Pooh with an empty honeypot.
Why do we call it the Brazilian? And then and I kind of wondered like if genital waxing was something that was going on in France in the 18th century. I kind of wondered how much exposure Claire would have had to it in the 1940s. I have no idea if people did that in the 1940s. And then I wondered if she would have been as shocked seeing that scene with the lady getting the hair ripped off and everything. I wondered if she, coming from the future, would have been as shocked. And that made me wonder about the history of just these kind of, processes of grooming and when they actually started. And I had no idea if it was, how accurate it was. Because that was something that I wondered all the time on the first season is she shaving? Like, because it's like such a sexy kind of, she's naked in half of the first season in the Scottish Highlands, and there's nary a hair to be found. So I was always wondering, like, how is she doing?
She's also English, so she's a little bit fair. It's like my sister has blonde hair everywhere. So like from until you're like right up close, I
Right.
inherited the French Canadian side of that, so that's not so much of an issue for me. but um, but yeah, I mean, I think it's just an attempt. I think for those of us who really are trying to maybe get lost a little bit more, it to me it was kind of one of the first moments where I was just like, really, it felt too long, and
Right.
it felt almost like a parody of itself, which I will say I also felt that the toilet chamber scene became a parody of itself. It it in the book that does happen, but it doesn't happen over a 5 minute scene, and they're not. And Jamie doesn't say, he kind of mentions to Claire, oh, if he's constipated, he should totally have porridge. That helps.
Right.
And she kind of jokes that that's their remedy for everything, is that you should just have more porridge in the morning. Um, everything would be better. Um, but I thought it weird that I mean, it was like uncomfortable for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know.
And,
I wondered if they were trying to it felt like the show was trying to keep the sex alive very early in the second season because it was so prevalent in the first season, but with Jamie's PTSD, rolling into the start of this and like their life in the bedroom is changed pretty drastically. They need to get it in there somewhere else, especially because it's such a jolt to go from Scottish Highlands to Paris.
mhm,
I felt like they were deliberately trying to kind of keep the sex in the show with, I mean,
mhm.
not with the toilet scene, but they were trying to keep that provocative.
How do you know? Yeah.
That
Yeah.
was that was their choice though, because all of that was outside the book. In the book,
Right.
they had started having sex again because they'd had a big fight about, what about the baby, and it's tiny, it's fine.
Right.
Yeah, and I thought that was really weird actually. That's one instance where I think they're actually handling it better is the show, because when you see, I think we talked about this last episode, when you see the violence versus reading it, right? It is so much worse. I mean, it is some
Yeah.
of, we talked about this last week. It's some of the most painful portrayals of torture I've ever seen on any show ever. And I
Yeah.
think if they had followed the trajectory of the book, where they get to Paris and they're like randy bunnies and they're like doing everything like they were before, and Jamie's like fine. Jamie to me is, I preferred the Jamie of the show like 100 times more. I think I remember, because I'm as I'm reading Dragonfly and Amber, I'm reminded of why it started to feel kind of, I don't know, he starts to become a little bit more watered down. And we talked about his sort of puppiness, and he fights back with her, and he says no, and there's that pain, that tension. I think is so important. It certainly defines their relationship. Just when they think they're going to be happy, they're not. But I
Yeah.
was so glad that they weren't just like jumping in with the cunnilingus again, and like, which is what they do in the book. It's like
Right.
immediately the honeypot's like front and center, and you're kind of like, whoa, really? Because like
That
just
threw me in the
three
for
Yeah.
weeks ago,
sure.
like he was, and yeah, really horrible stuff. So I do applaud them for that, and I think it would have done a disservice to anyone who'd had PTSD to act as if he could just coast back into the way it was before.
Or had been raped. I mean, that he's got a lot to deal with. Yeah. No, I think that the TV series totally took the better approach to have that be difficult. But at the same time, they're throwing in
Yeah.
dildos and shaved honey pots and
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. Like I really was kind of shocked by the end of the first book because I don't think I really I don't think it really registered when I was reading the first book until until Jamie was really in the clutches of Blackjack Randall, that this was not just like a bodice ripper romance, which
Hmm.
is what people think of it as.
Right.
That there was more going on, and I thought, okay, whoa, there, she's gonna go there.
Hmm.
But then he was sort of like, all right, I got buggered and I'm sad about it for a couple days. And then they kind of, had a talk and everything was all right. And he sort of went back to normal. And I thought that was really weird because, you know, trauma just doesn't work like that.
No, no, no. And I think that they try to say, I mean, and they do in the series, that at the end of the first season, he says the buggering isn't the worst part. And he talks about the branding and that
Right.
sort of mental. And I kind of worried that they were going to like use that as a way for him to kind of like easily coast into the relationship. But I think, I mean, if I was writing a paper on this, I would almost say that sexual relationships are like their own character in this series. I mean, there is such intensity, and you have this triune of, or I guess it's like, what is it, quad? Because you have Jack Randall, but then you have Frank Randall, and then you have
Right.
Jamie, and then you have Claire. And so there's this really complex thing going on in this kind of delicate dance. And I think that they very well thought about, because the writers room must have been like, we're trying to be true to the books. I think up to this point, they've been super close to the books.
Yeah.
Um, and they deliberately decided, I think in this time and place too. I think even 20 years ago when this book came out, 25, however, 25 years ago when the book came out, um, people rape was not something that was as much on the top of people's minds as it may be now. And there is
Right.
thankfully much more visibility into what that means, and it would probably it's not something that you can approach without gravitas. So
And that they think about the fact that it's a man being raped, because for a long time that was also, oh, no big deal, shrug it off.
Right. But that's
Especially.
interesting too, though, because, and this is a complete non sequitur, and I don't know what made me think of this, but like, the book The Prince of Tides came out a few years before Outlander was really big, and the whole point of that book is like getting to this revelation that the man had been raped and molested when he was younger, and it was all about the PTSD that he found about that, and it was one of the reasons that book was such a thing, and when it was made into a movie it was such a thing because nobody talked about that.
mhm.
So I get that, but at the same time she would have been writing this in a landscape. I'm sure there are other books, that's just the one that comes to mind, but she would have been writing this in the landscape in the early 90s when, the idea of male rape what really was starting
Right.
to be discussed. So it's not that she had no references, even literary references, to bounce off of how to kind of deal with that trauma. Um, and so I was a little surprised by that. So I definitely appreciate that the show is very aware of everybody's trigger warnings, and that they're
Mhm.
just sensitive to the actual, like, that that business with Black Jack Randall was, like, as you say, some of the most intense stuff I've ever seen filmed. um I think the only thing more intense I've ever seen is that, God, I can't remember the name of it, but that movie with Monica Bellucci where she's raped in the tunnel and the whole movie goes backwards.
Oh yeah.
That is like the worst movie I've ever. It's the worst portrayal I've ever seen. This, like, almost topped that.
Yeah.
And so I kind of like that he's trying to get back to himself, but that he's having nightmares and he's not perfect. And I kind of appreciate that. That's how the show is starting
Mhm.
the season, sort of addressing those issues.
I think
Um,
I think it just makes Jamie a better character too, because
yeah,
it's so easy. Because he is, I mean, he's the studly Highlander who's more modern than his times, who has red hair and who is like bigger than everyone and
right.
sexually virile. So I mean, just as in female characters, we don't, Claire does not fit necessarily in the model, but she's very beautiful, but she's super smart. She opens her mouth when she shouldn't. She doesn't follow the rules like she should. You don't
Yeah,
want her to have somebody that kind of lessens her uniqueness. So
right.
I'm glad that they're really making him so much more. And Sam Hewn has just the best smirk ever, and it's
He
like
really does.
it's like the little hints of the character that are coming through are far more satisfying for me than they were in the book. Because honestly, I mean, I stopped reading the series like 5 books in just because I was just tired of that. Um,
I hope they keep up the play with the dynamic of, that storyline and those characters, because honestly, the whole, like, trying to stop the revolution in the Highlands plot is, like, I'm already a little bored of it, because you sort of know how history plays out at this point. So they're doomed to fail. And so the whole watching them try to curry favor, with the Minister of Finance and thwart, anybody from going over there and raising a Jacobite army. That part of the plot, which is like the main plot of the season, I don't know. I'm having a really hard time. I'm like, meh, about that side of it.
yeah. So not to
Like, I
change
just,
subjects, but to change subjects, can we
sure.
talk about my favorite part of this entire episode, which was the clothes?
Yes.
Because that was some costume porn. Like, no, I mean, the
That was
opening of the
amazing.
episode was I forget her name's dress, but putting on the dress and the sort of like, to me, we talked about the costumes before and sort of that raw handmade feeling you had of the Scottish clothing, and then to really pull the veil open and just have this, I mean, your eyes like were like, mine were dazzling anyway. Just like the detail of the French craftsmanship
Yeah.
It must be a dream to work on the costumes of this show. But were there any things that stuck out to you in terms of costuming that you guys? I mean, I'm sure Jackie, you're probably like, fabric.
Marzia, were you like totally struck by the costumes?
I thought most of them were kind of amazing, although I was a little bit disappointed with Claire's red dress because I
Really?
felt like, it was so different from everything else as opposed to being different because it was strikingly red.
Right,
You
right.
know, in the book, um, and you know what? I hate myself for being the person who's like, well, in the book, this, because I started reading the book after watching the TV series, and the TV series is much better, I think. But in the book, the dress was fashionable. He still had the like, oh my God, I can see your navel. But it was French fashion and just strikingly red, and she looked great in it because it fit her.
Right.
Um, and here this was clearly it was out of period. It was odd. Um, it worked in a strange way though because she was onto something wearing a distracting dress with a split in the middle when the king's uh,
Hmm.
accompanied by somebody who has the most distracting dress ever invented.
Right,
That was,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, that dress was hilarious. I loved the red dress. Like I thought it was perfection. I knew it was so out of place with kind of what else was going on, and that's kind of why I loved it. Like I really feel like with the show, they're able to do, you know, similar to like Game of Thrones costuming, they're able to do really subtle little things with the costumes to kind of reinforce things about the characters. Like that was a
Hmm.
really modern dress for Claire to wear considering the period. And I kind of love that because she's from the future. It's sort of
Right.
constantly like even her clothes are this reminder that you know, she's in a different world.
Hmm.
And I just loved it when you saw it on the stairs and it was like low in the front and high at the bottom and like the widest dress I've ever seen. I don't know how she walked in it. You didn't get a true sense of how gravity was really like holding her boobs in place. And I almost felt like as the episode went on, that dress was like a character. Like there were moments where you were just so sure she was going to pop out, but I almost felt like it was almost more revealing as the party went on than it was when she first arrived on the stairs. I was like, okay,
Yeah.
well, it's low cut. I get how that's scandalous and it's huge and red, but it wasn't really till she was at the party and really mingling that you were like, you can see all of her secrets, in that
But
dress.
then she did
Like
not
that.
have little swans encircling her nips.
No,
So I
right.
think that was the cool thing is that it took it like
With glitter.
with glitter. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And poor Myrtle, he was just like,
His look, I loved that the focus was on him while she was in like a fuzzy profile of like just the look on his face. So you got like quick glimpses of her swan boob dress, but really all the impact of that dress was from Murtaugh's face. I
it
kind
was
of really
fantastic.
liked that.
And I was joking with Marcia earlier is that like I can't reconcile. There are times that I find, I guess his name's Duncan Lacroix, so he has a French last name. The actor who plays Myrta. Occasionally, I'm like, he's really cute, and then I'm like, why do I think that? Like, what is going on here? And especially the scene where they were dueling, um, because he just stands out so ruggedly. Because Jamie's kind of like adopted the sort of French attire. He's not wearing his tartan. He's got sort of the close crop pants, which aren't a bad thing either. But Myrta's kind of like aggressively Scottish, and
Yeah,
he's really holding on to that, and in his kind of like irascible way, but it's surprisingly charming. And the after sort of commentary for the show, they talked about how many times he just walks away from Jamie and Claire because there's just so many instances where he's just like, F you guys, like I just can't. But the dress, they purposely made him stay, and she goes, no, don't go. And so it's
right.
kind of interesting to see that they're like, he's fighting so hard to just like be different, and yet he's slowly being drawn into this, and then swan boobs. And what are you gonna do? I mean, he's just.
He's a man. He's a Scottish Highlands man. Like
And
what
she
do
was
you?
making eyes at him. I mean, it's not like he was imagining things. So, but yeah, I mean, everything down to the alchemist's clothes. we talk a lot about the girls' clothes. I loved the alchemist's vest. I don't know if
Yeah,
you guys noticed, but it had like all this crazy kind of like occultish embroidery, and the entire room. I mean, it was like I was like, "Am I watching Harry Potter? This is incredible."
it was the
That
best. That was one of my favorite sets so far on the
Hmm.
show.
and that would be that very much in keeping with the spirit of the book.
Hmm.
That he was intentionally he didn't believe in any of the crap, but he was like intentionally putting it around him because his customers did.
Yes.
Right.
That's he's the kind of guy that sells fake crocodile blood.
But yet the like the illusion of the place and sort of that the library stairs that can get moved across, and he's got his servant who knows exactly where everything is and just gently pushes him over so he can grab it. I mean, the theatrics of it, so much of that medicine being the
Right.
placebo effect, right?
Right.
Um, but then having Claire there because she doesn't know where else to go to get, and she used to collect all this stuff and whatnot, and it was kind of an interesting meeting of the minds. Um, an interesting mix too. I've noticed of French actors and English actors, and I would love to because you can kind of tell occasionally the accents go a little funny, or they're that you're maybe you're Dutch, maybe you're Belgian. I'm like trying to avoid looking at the translations because always get frustrated when they kind of like mess words up. I'm like it's not really what they're saying, but whatever. Close enough, close enough. We'll get there. But yeah, I mean it's cool that there is so much of this new language, and I mean I just don't know any shows that really. I mean half of this episode was in French,
Yeah.
huge portion of it.
I've actually
Um,
really been enjoying what they've been doing with the subtitles because the first season they didn't put any of the Celtic in
mhm,
subtitles. Like you had no idea what they were saying. So you really sort of were in the same boat as Claire as just, what are these people talking about? And that kind of when they would do it on purpose to alienate her so she wouldn't understand what they were saying. But here all the French is subtitled because she and Jamie speak French.
mhm,
And so they're really like they don't, they're very conscious of not leaving the audience behind on things. And I thought I didn't even always kind of register that there were no subtitles when they were in Scotland. But then I was very aware of it when they were in France, and that,
mhm,
that sort of interesting play that here, even though they're foreigners, she's on a much more level playing field with
mhm.
everybody there than she was in the Highlands. She has less of a learning curve where
Yep.
she is now than she did in the first season. And that was honestly one of the reasons I love that red dress because I felt like with the hair and the earrings, she seemed so much taller. She was much statelier, even than modern, original recipe 1945 Claire Randall would have been. She was very like,
I love those earrings. Those were incredible.
yeah, I kind of felt like, you really got a sense that she'd arrived in a place where she wasn't intimidated and she could keep up with all of these men and even with the bawdy women that she was much more at ease. And Jamie was surprisingly, more at ease. It was very weird to hear him speaking French with a Scottish accent.
It's beautiful.
It was amazing.
It
It
really is.
was great. So I like that. I like how they're doing the languages.
Mhm. Totally agreed.
Yeah.
So what about, so I guess we've covered most of the stuff, but we've talked a little bit about the potty episode. So trying to make inroads with the king. How about Prince Charlie? What do we think about that casting and the dildo scene?
Well, they've taken another interesting turn from the book in that
Mhm,
because Prince Charlie was all about a girl that he was pining for who was married. And that was his whole motive of I'm going to go be king because then I can go rescue her.
mhm,
Ah,
And he wasn't nearly as gung ho about I'm going to do this right now for sure. It was more of a is he or isn't he?
mhm,
I have a hard time imagining how like Scotland would get behind him because just from Murtaugh and Jamie's reaction to him, you know, you sort of know it happened in history, but like, how did he get all of these Scots on it? Like, he's so different from them, like the way he is on the show is like head to toe could not be more different. And they were ready to kill him after, like one conversation.
yeah,
So it's hard to imagine how they would trust him or believe in his cause, even for their own benefit. It's hard to imagine him raising any army at all.
yeah, and I think a lot of that has to do with just the power that the church still had, the Catholic Church. I mean, we're talking like 150 years after the Reformation, or not the Reformation, uh, the dissolution of the monasteries and Henry VIII and everything, and Elizabeth coming through, and so it's still within, maybe a great grandfather's memory, and it had been like that for so long, and now these posers were here, and they were, they were mostly English, and they ruined everything, and they
Right.
also killed Mary Queen of Scots and all these other people that were these, sort of amazing pinnacles of Scottish identity, even though they were French, which is really interesting, actually, the connection between Scotland and France. In fact, the Frasers, it said, were actually Fraser coming from fries, which means strawberry. Actually may have been, the theory is that they may have been come from France. It's kind of the local lore, I guess. My Scottish godfather always said, you can just claim to be one of the Frasers because they came from France. I was like, I'm pretty sure.
What clan would you be sorted into?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'll take them. That's totally fine.
Where's that?
But I think the power of the church and the I mean, when you really believe something and your people believe something for hundreds of years, how much of a betrayal it felt to have non-Catholics on the crown. And when Charlie talks about his divine right, that kind of the thing that got the French into trouble too a few hundred years later. As Claire mentions, like, by the end of the century, or the end of this century, the streets are in blood, bathed in blood, because they've, all these people their descendants are going to be killed.
Right, right.
And it happens within the blink of an eye. They think that they're going to be able to do it. And so I think that passion comes from a very medieval perception in many ways that, the divine right of kings should be the church. And they felt like the Pope was behind them. So if the Pope is behind them, then,
Right. Then they're all good. I guess too, like if you're a regular guy fighting for this cause, on the battleground in Scotland, you're not really interacting with Charlie, so they don't know what he's like. They don't know what a, sort of doofus he is in reality. So that makes total sense. They're fighting for an idea and a principle, and a belief.
Mm-hmm.
And who the figurehead is for that is probably kind of irrelevant,
Yeah.
like who the king is and what their personality is like, because that's the fascinating thing, is it's not even a matter of if he would be better,
Right.
if he's making all these alliances, but there are a lot of assumptions that, because he's Catholic, because it's the divine right, they don't have any guarantees that he would treat them any better. It's not like that he's campaigning.
Right.
It's
And
so
currently, correct me if I'm wrong, and I read the Wikipedia article, which this is always the period that confuses me the most, but the current king and queen or queen and king are Mary and William, right? And Mary was the Protestant daughter of, actually, now I can't remember.
I don't remember who they said was king. I don't remember.
This is where I get confused, inevitably. But yeah, either way, I think they felt also like they were the...
Wasn't it James?
I was thinking it was James, but I don't... Wasn't James after Elizabeth?
So yeah, but that would have been earlier.
Right, so I don't know if there were two James...
It's confusing.
Back to back or something? Right? Because Liz 1 was 1600s, right?
Isn't it? It's Charles, James, Charles, isn't it? Or is it the other way around?
So then maybe it was a James if there were two James back to back. That would make sense, because if she was 1600s followed by James, by the 1740s, it wouldn't be the same James necessarily.
Right.
It's George.
George, yeah.
So
that was my snaky Google.
Yeah, so this is, the Glorious Revolution resulted in James II of England and the 7th of Scotland fleeing to exile in France under the protection of Louis the 14th, sorry. James's daughter and her husband, that's William and Mary, they were Presbyterians, became the House of Hanover is what ended up happening, and then that ended up to Queen Anne, George I. So by this point, we're at... so confusing. George II in 1727.
Who was also the king who lost America, I believe.
Was that the third?
1776, would that be 30 years later? I mean, that's not so...
Well, this is he was until 1760, so it would have been George III who lost.
George III who lost America, okay.
Yep. So, it's all very confusing. And then many people felt that the Hanovers were, they were Germans, and it was not. So it felt like they were imposters. And I think that that's what the Scots really identified with, is that they wanted, and they had a storied history of having a monarchy, having a foot in the monarchy, and having lordships and lairdships and all that kind of stuff. And
Right, right.
um, obviously that didn't turn out so well for a while, until, as we talked about last time, until Queen Victoria came around and decided that kilts were okay, and the shorter the better, because she was a lovely, lovely
I
little
love
wretch.
Vicky.
Yeah,
She's
just
nuts.
squirted out as many kids as possible and brought back the kilt. I mean, we have a lot to be thankful for in her, and perhaps the entire birth of steampunk as a genre. Because what is it without Queen Victoria? um,
Uh,
so I guess the biggest other thing we have to talk about is the plot twist at the very end. So
yeah,
Sandringham shows up again. We don't like him. He's even worse than we thought, and I felt like the conversation was going really, really well until we realized who his clerk was,
yeah.
and that was
And that was when he started to get that mischievous look in his eye. Like he knew he was like there was a moment when and that actor I can't remember his name, but he was so good because at first he looked a little intimidated to see Claire and a little
right.
like on the defensive. And then there was that moment when she had a look in her eye and then he had a look in her eye and he caught it so fast. And
Hmm.
it was like seeing those tables turn in like a second when he suddenly realized that he knew something she didn't and that he could just really upend her with this information. I thought that was just such a good scene, you know? It was
Yeah.
really, really like,
And this is one of the first times in recent episodes we're really seeing her lose her. I mean, she didn't completely lose her cool, but you can tell she's like getting one of those like I'm gonna pass out kind of moments. Like this
yeah,
is the worst. I thought we were safe, and also what the hell am I gonna tell Jamie,
right.
Right.
who was just like he's still alive to me, which is what he had said earlier in the episode. She's like he's still alive to everybody else too.
Now, see, I haven't read the second, I haven't finished the second book. They're still in 1968 where I am. So I don't know. And I guess this is what I was wondering was, if they're in France, how much damage is Blackjack going to do to them? I understand the psychological ramifications of him still being alive, but at this point, for me as a viewer, I have no idea if he's coming back into the picture. I have no idea if he's going to leave Scotland and like make his way down to Paris to seek more revenge. I have
Mhm.
no idea if they will be in physical danger from him again or if it's really just you know, just the knowledge that he's still out there and the kinds of stuff he could be doing to other people. So like that's one of the things that I'm, looking at as the season goes on is what are they going to do with that character? Is he going to be back?
Right.
I kind of envy your ignorance because I know what the book says about that.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I have no idea. So I guess, you know, yeah, I guess this is a no book spoilers moment because I just don't know. I don't know when he dies, you know.
But
So
Claire did. She told him
she did, but she whispered it in his ear and
so
didn't.
that we, the audience, don't know.
Right,
Right.
right.
Which
Well,
is
exactly. Yeah,
if she finds out he's alive, should she really be that surprised, or did she think she like changed fate? And if she
right.
thought she changed fate, then maybe
Then maybe that's a clue that she can't.
right, maybe she thought she could, and now she can't. So,
I mean, she clearly thinks she can because she's trying to change the entire history of Scotland.
but she thought that she was able to get Jack killed before she knew he died.
Right, right.
So,
But that would also be before her first husband was conceived. So
Yeah, that's when I kind of started to wonder about how are all of these time loops going to, you know, how are they gonna kind of, what is she gonna think of these? Because changing the course of history like that would affect so much. Like,
mhm.
she has to have thought that she's obliterating her future husband
Maybe
by,
it's like common scientific thought that maybe she just all these alternate worlds are just kind of spinning off in other directions. So there's other Claires and other Franks who are living happily ever after, and then there's like miserable Claire, and the darkest timeline is there somewhere.
paintings are going to start erasing, like in Back to the Future photographs,
Yes,
and like
yes,
suddenly people won't be in them anymore. Yeah, so that's something that I kind of get a little bit, just about the series in general is now they're really starting to play with, history and time more than they really were in the first book.
yeah.
And, what impact are they going to have, if any? And that's where I start to wonder if it's going to be feudal. And irritating
Well,
to watch because you know that they're not changing things.
we already know they're not changing things because we found out in the very first episode, or at least they're not changing the ultimate outcome because the Battle of Culloden was already fought when
Well,
she
sure.
appeared.
Right, and but I guess that's what I'm saying is if we already know they didn't change history. So it just makes me wonder how this plot of trying to change history,
Right.
how they're going to keep it engaging. We already, I mean, even without the first episode, we already know,
Hmm.
you know, we already know that they're not going to kind of win that change.
Right.
So I like that's one of the things that I'm wondering how they're going to handle that, and how the book handles it as I get back to reading it is
Yeah.
that going to just be really tedious to kind of just watch them beat their heads against the wall trying to change history and knowing they can't.
Hmm. Well, I think that Marzia's point too is really interesting. That she thinks she can change and might have changed history at the cost of her first husband. Like
Right.
that's how much she believes in what she's doing and how much she believes in Jamie and how much she loves him. Is that if she really thinks about it, she could have just erased her husband from existence. Maybe she doesn't think she's ever going to get back. I mean, we certainly have hints of what her life is going to be like in the future stemming from that first episode, but we don't really get, and I won't talk about the book, but the book goes significantly further, as you said, 1968. And they've chosen not to do that on the series, which is interesting to me. And I'm wondering how long they can go
Right.
um, on this particular rail, because the book kind of has these parallel rails before they have to start dipping in. So it's going to be, I'm just very curious. I would kill for some screeners, is what I'm saying. So,
Yeah.
Well,
stars, if you're listening.
Definitely.
and to loop it around, so she was willing to sacrifice her first husband Frank in order to save Scotland. And as we begin the first episode, she's sacrificed her second husband.
Yes. Yep. And she absolutely believes 100% that he's dead.
Right.
And that's
Even though she's still going through all the history books to try and find out exactly what happened.
right. But then she promises
Well,
she will not do that anymore. And I think
Right.
she knows
that's a
he's
little
dead.
bit of
It's a matter of when he died, because I mean,
right. But it is
I mean,
still a
right.
little bit
Obviously,
of
he's not.
suspension of disbelief. Because, I mean, if it was me, I'd be, like, running back to those stones and be like, no, like, let me back in,
Right.
maybe,
Right.
probably. So, yeah, I mean, it's going to be, I'm very curious as to how they're going to present the rest of this season. Um,
but
Yeah.
they also gave us two other clues because they said that she'd been gone for 2 years, or she'd
right.
been married for 2 years, yet she was pregnant.
Yeah. So
Yes. And that's
where's
one of the confusing parts too, is because she says she's already been there for 3 months. And I'm like, when you went through the stones, you were definitely not very pregnant. Which she's like she was so not that obviously pregnant. I mean, maybe she's one of those ladies that just doesn't show anything, but I feel like the time is a little bit off,
I
right?
don't know. I assume that maybe there was a second child somewhere back
Right.
in, like that she was pregnant with their second child, not their first child,
That's how
because
it feels. That's how it seems to be in.
clearly time passed, if she, as you said, if she was married to Jamie for 2 years
But
and
wouldn't she have
pregnant,
brought that up though? Like, I mean, as mothers,
well, maybe that's part of, maybe losing Jamie is part of it, but maybe she lost a child too, and that, or, some reason that she's not kind of pregnant in the right timeline. Because at the end of the first season, they say that she's been in Scotland for 8 months when
right?
she's telling Jamie that she's pregnant. So if she's married to him for 2 years,
That's weird.
then
Yeah, the
there's
time is definitely
definitely
off because they already said we've been in France for 3 months. I'm like, well, you were pregnant when you got to France. You're
right,
not showing, presuming that even if like it's a month between now and when you happen to go through the stones, you don't look like you're pregnant.
right,
So
right,
she would have to be at least. Suppose they wrap up everything in a month time, right? She'd still be
right.
5 or 6 months pregnant when she goes back through the stones.
Well, she would be, except that don't they? I mean, I maybe I'm missing this too, but I was under the impression when she came back through the stones to her original time period that she was leaving the Battle of Culloden. Like that was
Right.
part of what was going on, and
That's
they're in
not for a while.
1945 in they're in 1945 in Paris, but didn't they say that battle took place in 1946?
1746, yes.
1940, not 1940, 1740,
1746.
1745 and 1746. So I I don't know how long they're in Paris, but I'd assume that it was like a year before that battle was supposed to take place, which would be time to have something happen to the first child and get started on the second.
I guess. I mean, that they could be going that route.
And and if I don't know, if she's married to Jamie for 2 years, then that would fit the timeline better. Because I was watching the dates, trying to figure out exactly what how she was pregnant and how all the timepieces fit together. So I think that I think that where they are now in Paris, they're a good year until that big battle in Scotland, and maybe a year till she goes back to the Stones.
I don't know. A little confused on that point. Well,
Yeah, it is
I
confusing.
think we've covered just about all that we had. Is there anything else that's been, sort of the back of your mind that you wanted to talk about? Jackie, I know you weren't here for the first. You covered a couple things that we had talked about, so it sounds like we're all on the same plate when it comes to this
Yeah,
stuff, which is
I think
awesome.
I know. I was watching the recap last week and going, "That's what I was going to talk about. That's what I was going to talk about."
Well, in that case, I think we will sign off for now. Please do comment and ask us questions. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd be happy to answer any questions or come up with our own, harebrained theories. If you have an explanation of the timeline or any suggestions about waxing in 18th century France,
That's
please
what.
do let us know. You can hit us up on our YouTube page and visit us at glittersquid.com. Thanks, y'all, for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next week.